welcome to CTD Interviews, a series of meetings with relevant professionals of the ELT and business sector to talk about 21st century skills, coaching, development and training in education. Today we are going to talk about 21st century skills in the ELT classroom with our guest speaker, Christopher Graham. Chris, good morning and thank you for being here today.
Well, it's good morning for me, but it's good afternoon from you, isn't it? I think you're just in the afternoon and I'm still in the morning.
Well, slightly later than you. Yeah. So, Chris, you have worked in the ELT sector since 1981, if I'm not wrong.
You're not wrong. Yeah, it seems a long time. It is a long time, actually.
It is a long time, and you've been in many countries. If I counted them all, more or less 30 countries.
Something like that for different projects, some longer term and some much shorter term. But I started my English teaching career in Italy, so there we are. So I'm making a full circle here.
Okay, so let's hope you come back to Italy one day.
Well, yeah, I go back a lot for holidays and things, but I started teaching in Italy in 1982, I think it was.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Good. Chris, you've been involved in projects with the British Council, with ministries of education, international publishers, and you are also one of the founders of the ELT Footprint, which is a 2020 ELT on Elton winner.
Well, yeah, that's right. I'm very much involved in the ecological movement. In general terms, in particular with reference to English language teaching, I think it's a really important area. And yeah, winning the Elton was quite a moment. It's somewhere on my bookcase. It's not behind me, but I do actually have the physical Elton here because I was the only one in the UK, so I was the one who was actually given it. But no, it was a really nice thing to be given, but also it was on behalf of the 3,500 members that we've got in Footprint now, so it's been a joint effort, really.
Okay, so congratulations for that. You are also the contributing editor of the book 21st Century Skills in the ELT Classroom, a guide for teachers. I've got this with me because I find this book enlightening, really very interesting. And this is our conversation will be about 21st century skills. So can we agree what we mean by 21st century skills, first of all? Yeah,
I mean, I suppose the first thing to say is that it doesn't have to be a rigid definition. I mean, I think if you speak to different practitioners outside of English language teaching as much as inside, you'll have different definitions. I mean, maybe I'm lazy, I don't know what it is, but I'm quite comfortable to use the set of definitions from the Partnership for 21st Century Skills, which has recently renamed itself. But where they have these three categories. There's the life and career skills, they have the information, media and technology skills, but the ones that most EFL teachers coincide with or will find in their course books, the learning and innovation skills known as the 4 C's, collaboration, creativity, communication and critical thinking. So I'm very comfortable with that structure. But it doesn't have to be rigid, it's not carved in stone. And what I like about the 21st century skills approach, I suppose, is that there are lots of sub-skills. And so new sub-skills appear. I mean, the intercultural skills, I also I'm quite active in the intercultural zone. So I'm glad that intercultural or cross-cultural communication appears as a sub-skill, because I think that is very much part of learning a language, of using a language. I think equality, diversity and inclusivity, EDI, is also a set of sub-skills around there. I happen to know that a couple of universities in the UK, Glasgow Caledonian University and Oxford Brookes University, both incorporate EDI into their global citizenship course, which is a course around 21st century skills. And going slightly back to ELT Footprint, maybe the skill sets around the way we interact with the issues around our environment and the way we communicate environmental issues, maybe that's also a set of sub-skills. So, and there are certainly others too. So there's flexibility as well as some kind of structure. But I'm reasonably content with that structure, I think. And I say the 4 C's are the ones that people always kind of grab hold of, I think.
The most important ones, yeah. Yes, that's true. But is it true that some people don't like the term 21st century skills?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's that they just like the term rather than the concept. And I have some sympathy with it. I suppose it's a slightly unfortunate term because it's kind of date stamped, it's kind of date specific, and we've all sort of woke up quite recently. Oh, we're in the 21st century. How did this happen? So it is perhaps a slightly unfortunate term because I suppose the implication is that they didn't exist in the 20th century or before, or that they sound kind of futuristic in an almost science fiction-y kind of way. I think there are objections to that. I think people also feel that maybe publishing companies use this term just as a way of promoting something, which is a bit unfair. I mean, they are part of almost all ELT course books now, adult and secondary courses have some reference to 21st century skills. So I understand why the publishers do that. There are, it's just a label. Some people said, why don't we just call them skills? Some people talk about soft skills. I don't like the term soft skills because it makes them sound unimportant. So it's only soft skills, whereas I think a lot of the soft skills are actually really so important to human interactivity. Forget language learning, above and beyond language learning, that it is just a term. Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate because it's kind of date specific, I suppose.
We can call them also life skills. I mean, there are so many.
There are lots of terms. Yeah, I mean, the Partnership with 21st Century Skills has life skills as, you know, one of their 3 categories or subcategories. So, I suppose, the problem I think is that it's date specific, which is unfortunate, but there it is. We just have to work with that.
Yeah. So maybe, is this the reason why when we agreed on meeting today and I asked Chris, are you happy to be interviewed on 21st century skills? Then you added this extra bit, 21st century skills, not as new as their name suggests. So what do you mean by that? Well,
I mean, if we stop and think, I mean, in the book that you showed a second ago, J.J. Wilson wrote many people listening will know of J.J. and his work, and in his critical thinking chapter, he talked about Socrates, and I think I can't remember the direct quotation, but basically Socrates walking around the markets of Athens with his students, asking them questions which in turn required other questions to be asked. Now that was quite a long time ago. That's certainly not 21st century, and maybe not going back as far as Socrates, but there is nothing new about these skills. Human beings have been collaborating since the beginning of time. Communication is just part of the human existence, isn't it, really? So there is nothing new about them. But I think what's new about them, one is these labels, that they've been given labels, and the labels that some people are not comfortable with. But we need, I suppose, a way of categorizing them. If we're going to teach them, we need a way of categorizing and managing them. So the skills are not new, the names are new. But what I think is also relatively new is that these are now being taught. I mean, they are certainly, to a greater or lesser extent, as I say, part of the human existence. The ability to collaborate, to create, to even critical thinking is something that people, back to Socrates, people have been doing for a long time. But now we are teaching them either in our general education at school. Many universities are teaching them nationally and within individual institutions. But also they're becoming part of the ELT environment as well. So I think that's the other difference, that they're not new, but they're teaching them overtly, let's say, it's probably new.
Yes, absolutely. In Italy, you know, our students in high school, they have to spend a certain number of hours working on their, we call them transversal competencies. So another word for that.
Another word, yeah, another label.
Another word for that. And it is something that they have to do. I mean, it's part of their curriculum. And yes, I can see that teachers sometimes find themselves as if it were a real challenge. So it is. So I don't know if you agree with that, that teachers may find difficult or challenging assessing, supporting the students.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I suppose the first there are a number of reasons teachers can feel challenged. I think one of them is certainly in the ELT context. A new course book comes, a new course book is selected. Teachers may or may not be involved in the process of selection, but here's the new course book, and they inevitably go to the back of the book and start looking what's in the book, or they look at the book map. And increasingly now, if you look at the book map in a standard adult ELT course, there'll be a column called 21st Century Skills. You know, well, hang on, what's this? We're used to grammar, we're used to vocabulary, we're used to what's this thing that's appeared? So I think one of the reasons might be that teachers haven't received enough initial information in advance before the new school year, so they're confronted with this course book and think, we don't know anything about this. I think that's an issue, just lack of information effectively. I think another reason is that as well as not feeling they've been told enough about the skills, teachers are quite rightly often concerned, ELT teachers, if they feel they are stepping outside of ELT world. I mean, if you've ever worked on English for specific purposes, English for occupational purposes courses, some teachers can be quite reluctant. Well, I can't teach these pilots. I don't know anything about flying airplanes. But we're not teaching them about flying airplanes. We're giving them the language to express and understand these concepts. So teachers are often reluctant to jump out of the ELT kind of structure, for whatever else we want to call it. I think another challenge, and you already alluded to this, is about assessment and measurement. Teachers like to assess. Ministries of education like to assess. Parents like their students to be assessed. Adults like to self-assess. Assessing 21st century skills and understanding if a student is making progress is not as straightforward as it is in a general ELT course, and it's not straightforward in a general ELT course either. So it's very, very hard to measure performance, or performance improvement. I think that's something that teachers need a lot of support with. I think also for teachers in more, let's say, more traditional teaching environments, where classrooms are still very teacher-centered, where the teacher is at the front teaching. 21st century skills come along, collaboration. Wait a minute, they're working in groups, they're working in creativity, they're going to, it's very often a different approach to the classroom, which is increasingly becoming the norm, but it is not the norm yet in many countries. So I think there's a kind of methodological shock. If we want 4 teachers to work together and students to work together and collaborate on something, our whole classroom is different. It's not me at the front anymore. It's me guiding, advising, supporting, coming in when necessary. So I think there's a change there. I think also local educational cultures. I mean, some educational cultures are very supportive of 21st century skills. They're going on to the curriculum in mainstream education. Others are not. So teachers are kind of can find that challenging. And another one, which is a slightly political thing, is not, if we take critical thinking particularly, which is the one that tends to perhaps come to the top in ELT discussions around 21st century skills. There are cultures and societies in the world where critical thinking, asking the big questions, is not necessarily encouraged in society. So the teacher finds themselves somewhere where the book says, ask questions, and then ask questions, then ask questions, come to conclusions. But we have to be a bit careful here. So that's another pressure. So it's not an easy ride for teachers. And teachers always want to do the best for their students. And I think once they see the response from students, and students can say, yeah, this is interesting, this is useful, then things start to move forwards.
So Chris, if you were to give some ideas on how to integrate 21st century skills in the day-to-day teaching, what would you suggest?
Well, it's interesting because for me, 21st century skills in English language teaching is both a what and a how. And I'll start with the how. If you stop and think or watch an ELT teacher at work in a class, whether it's adults or teenagers, doesn't matter, you will see that teacher actually encouraging students to apply 21st century skills as part of their learning process anyway, and we have been doing that for years. So it is part of our methodology, embedded in our methodology. For example, just the simple process of putting students into groups, saying, read this text together, once you've read the text, take your answers over to that table, that table will come to you. The classic kind of jigsaw reading or shared text reading process that teachers have been doing for years was collaborative, because we're asking them to work together. It's about communication, because they go, oh, we thought number 3, oh, no, wait a minute, you've got number 2. Now I see all this process. There we have some creativity going on around problem solving. Sometimes critical thinking in the text. So we've been using 21st century skills as teachers, but through our students for many, many years. So if we want to encourage students to apply these processes outside of the classroom, one thing I think is just to be a little bit forensic and say, well, okay, now we've done that reading. What do we do? Well, first of all, we read it alone, then we talked about it together, and then we agreed or disagreed, and then we made a list. We worked together, made a list, and you went to that table and she came over here, and actually pointing out where you were collaborating, you're communicating. So actually showing what they're doing, and they say, would you ever do these things in real life? And then the process of introducing 21st century skills comes along. Well, of course, also, I mean, critical thinking is such a great driver for discussion. That going back to Socrates again, the questions that generate more questions, that generates discussion. And if we choose our topics for critical thinking appropriately, the language generation happens despite the classroom, despite the teacher. It happens because the students want to engage with the content. And going back to the environment issues, I mean, I sound very old now, young people today do engage very readily with green issues, and asking them to think about this process, think about, let's talk about digital learning, online learning. Is it as green as we think? And there we have critical thinking. Well, actually it's not, because we use a lot of energy, a lot of electricity, and all the stories around that. So I think it's a great driver for discussion. I also think, thinking about collaboration, this idea of noticing grammar, which has become a very, I think, a much more common approach to the way that we engage with grammar, when students work together and look for patterns and understand no SN as an SN as an ING there, and between them they figure out how the structure works. Well, that for me is collaboration in action.
Yeah.
So I think my message would be that the key is not so much overt teaching, but we're probably doing it anyway, but just to stop and say, look, you worked together on that. Did everybody speak? And if she didn't say much, well, did you have a chairperson on the table? Maybe they should have said to her, would you like to say something? Yeah. So we start to just refine their approach to collaboration, to being sure that everyone is heard. So it is fully integrated, and it is nothing new. What's new, perhaps, is pointing it out to students, discussing it with students, and I think some of the other skills around information and around the way we use technology have become tremendously important when we're asking students to particularly even more than ever now when we're working online, ask them to go away to research, to come back with conclusions, to share ideas. They're having some understanding about information and about sources of information, and understanding who wrote this has a position. They've been paid to write it, or they have a political position, before they actually take it as fact. Yeah. So I think all the the online work we're doing at the moment is really encouraging us to work with information and have some understanding how search engines work, and what the first searches that come, someone has probably paid for. So for me, it integrates very nicely through the entire language learning process, but we do need to point it out. Say, look, what did you just do? Okay, that's what we did. And give it a label.
So maybe just slightly changing the dynamics of the classroom, for example, that is quite important. Now, for example, you mentioned working, collaborating. It is something that a teacher, an English teacher, language teacher, does every single day, but maybe giving the students more responsibilities on their work, their role inside the group, or maybe call them the team, so that it makes them
absolutely
exactly, giving them ownership of what they are doing, ownership of their learning, of their goals. So I think it is something that we do. You said quite right at the beginning of this, my last question, you said it's not maybe the what, but the how we do things in the classroom. So using those techniques that can help our students to be sort of more protagonists of their learning,
Absolutely.
of their decisions, of their working together. Yes.
And I think so, just around the working in groups and giving students roles. Maybe somebody's the note maker, someone is the chair, whatever the roles are. That's where, if there's going to be any assessment, it comes in.
Yeah.
We can't, if we go back to critical thinking as ever, we can't assess the result of critical thinking because there's no right answer. You may think this, I may think that, we're both right or wrong. Exactly. What you can assess is the process.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you ask students after they've done an activity, maybe a discussion, any kind of activity around a table, to unpick it and say, okay, what did you do?
Yes.
We did this, then we did this. Was everybody involved? No, those two didn't say anything. Well, who was the chair? Maybe, okay, we should have involved them. To actually assess the process. I remember, I was dreadful at mathematics at school, really bad at maths at school, but I do remember the teacher always saying to us, you have to show your working, show your calculations. I very rarely got anything right, but on the odd occasion I did get it right. I think the teachers had thought it was lucky, but they wanted me to show the process. And I think it's quite similar. You can't really assess the result because what's right and what's wrong, I don't know. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
But what you can do is say, that was interesting, but why didn't you look at that piece of information? You didn't ask her. So kind of being a little bit forensic and unpicking the process, that in that way we can assess it, I think.
Yes. And also I think that also self-assessment is really important. So let the student assess themselves. I have written a self-assessment questionnaire for my leadership students, from my students here at school. And after a project or a task or an activity, they have to self-reflect on how they have performed. And then they have to find a way to improve if necessary. Okay, I did this. What else can I do? What could I have done differently, for example?
Absolutely.
So I think this is really very important. So to make our students have time to assess themselves, assess their performance.
And combine that closely with not a repeat, but a similar activity next week or tomorrow. Okay, we're going to do something similar. Now, remember, before we start, remember the conversation yesterday, and hopefully they can bring things forward. Because I think it's, I agree absolutely about self-assessment. I think peer assessment is interesting, and combined with the work of the teacher, you can get more than just a snapshot. You can almost get a three-dimensional view of the whole process, because that's what it's about. It's a process. Critical thinking collaboration is a process. It's not just a one-off event. And we need to but the challenge with self-assessment at the beginning is to develop the students' tools to do it. I think with adult learners who've been on training courses at work or in their business or something, they're more attuned to it because they've learnt more things, basically. I think with teenagers it's more challenging, but once they develop this toolbox of ways of viewing their own performance, I agree, they can do it, absolutely.
Yes. Chris, it was such a lovely conversation. I wouldn't stop here. I would continue forever. So maybe
I can talk forever, as you probably noticed.
We can have a second interview.
Be delighted.
Yes, and we can talk about this topic more. I mean, I love this topic, and I can see how much you love it too. And it is really, really very important. So I will continue reading your book that I find really interesting. Yes, thanks. So Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. And I wish you good luck with all your wonderful projects.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks ever so much.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.